Greg Howell only gave a few orders as a commanding officer in Vietnam, and one of them involved a monkey. This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com and constructionbusinessaccelerator.com. It's my job to help you eliminate chaos and maximize revenue. This is the podcast for the small construction business owner. Today I'm going to share a conversation that I had with Greg Howell. He is one of the founding fathers of the lean construction movement. And here's what you're going to get out of this podcast. This is one of my favorite conversations ever. You'll learn how the lean construction movement got started. You'll learn about how Greg's experience as a Navy SeaBee influenced lean construction. You'll find out the impact of one commanding officer's leadership style and how it changed Greg's approach to leadership. Greg's going to share the books that he recommends that you read, a few paradigm shifts that construction leaders need to make, and this is key. You'll learn about the difference between an order and a promise. Greg also shares one unexpected benefit of lean construction principles that he can't quite explain yet. This is a fantastic conversation. Again, one of my favorites ever. I released this podcast maybe 4 years ago. It has been quite a while, but it is worth repeating. It was, in January of 2016. So if you've listened to it before, listen to it again. And if you haven't listened to this one yet, you are in for a treat. This podcast episode is sponsored by Company Cam. And as a contractor, you manage a ton of jobs every day, and trying to keep up to speed and ensure that the work actually gets done takes up way too much time, and that's where Company Cam comes in. Every photo that your guys take at a job is automatically organized by location and instantly synced from the field to wherever you are. Now you'll know exactly what's happening across your company. You'll be able to communicate more effectively and cover your butt from future claims. Document your jobs, communicate with your crews, and protect your company, all with Company Cam, the only app every contractor needs. Claim your free 14-day trial, plus get 50% off your first 2 months at companycam.com/CLE. Let's get a 14-day free trial, plus 50% off your first 2 months at companycam.com/CLE. Let me ask you a question. How much is your lack of systems costing you or about to cost you? Think about this. Are you about to lose good employees because they're fed up with the chaos in your business? Are your customers passing you up for repeat business because of your lack of systems? Are they looking for somebody else to do their work because they're tired of all the chaos? Or maybe you're just working too many hours. Well, how would you like to have systems and processes in place? Think about that. What would it do for you if you had a systematized business that ran like a well-oiled machine? If you're like the hundreds of construction business owners who have told me, quote, Todd, I want systems and processes. I want processes and systems. Then this is for you. For a limited time, you can get instant access to my free online training workshop, Systematize Your Construction Business. You're going to learn how to get to the real root cause of the problems you're dealing with and stop screwing around with the symptoms. And you'll find out how to put together a process or a system in a way that drastically improves the chances that your people will actually use it. You'll also learn about some of the biggest mistakes that you might be making when you're trying to put systems and processes in place. So grab your copy of these free videos, Systematize Your Construction Business, by going to constructionbusinessaccelerator.com. And they're only going to be available for a limited time. And if they're not available when you get there, you should be able to get your name on the wait list. Go to constructionbusinessaccelerator.com. In addition to people telling me they need systems and processes, I talk to a lot of people who say, I'm busier than ever, I've grown my people, I have more backlog than ever, but I'm not making money. It doesn't make sense. I'm busier than ever, but I'm not making money. I've grown the top line, but my bottom line is not where it needs to be. Spending more, turning more and more dollars over, buying more material, processing more money in payroll, dealing with more customers, and making less money. It just doesn't make sense, does it? What I found is that there are a lot of profit bleeds, and there's a lot of cash being hemorrhaged. So I've put together a live event. I'm going to be focusing this next advance, the Advance live event. It's going to be in Florida, April 2nd and 3rd. It is the Advance, bottom line growth hacks and secrets for builders and contractors. So if you want to grow your bottom line, maybe you're not so interested in growing the top line, but you want to maximize your bottom line, then check out the Advance. That's exactly what we're going to talk about and focus on in that event. Here's what you're going to get out of the Advance. You're going to boost your bottom line without hiring more people or finding more customers. You're going to figure out how to triage the profit bleeds that are causing you to hemorrhage cash. You'll uncover some of the hidden opportunity costs that never show up on an invoice but could be hammering your bottom line. You'll learn how to do what I call scheduling for revenue so you can reduce your cycle times on your projects. You'll get some insider secrets on how to maximize the productivity of your workforce by employing military leadership strategies used in the war on terror. Learn how to nail the handoff to reduce mistakes, chaos, and rework. Lots of other stuff. You're going to develop relationships with a group of like-minded construction business owners. You're going to get away from your business, go to sunny Southwest Florida in April, where there is zero chance of snow. It's going to be 85 degrees. And I'm telling you, this is one of the best things I can do for you. So get away from your business for a couple of days. Bring your leadership team. Make it a strategic leadership advance. I don't like the word retreat. Make it an offsite meeting. Bring your people. But grab your early bird seats now while they're still available over at constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/advance. It's the Advance Bottom Line Growth Hacks and Secrets for Builders and Contractors live event, April 2nd and 3rd, Southwest Florida. Go to constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/advance. So now, without further ado, let's get into my interview with Greg Howell, one of the founding fathers of the lean construction movement. All right, Greg, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Well, I'm pleased to do that.
So for folks who may not be familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of your background and what you may be well known for?
I'm a little afraid about what I might be well known for.
Let's put it. Let's say the positive things.
Positive things. Thank you. I think if I look all the way back in my life, my mother was a production manager, and she knew how to get things done. And I was around her a lot, and I learned a lot from her. Having said that, I went to Stanford University, entered in 1961, and ended in early '66. And I have a bachelor's in civil engineering that I received there. And that's where I got particularly interested in productivity improvement. The professors in the department were trying to understand how people did work. And they were very experienced people themselves. They spent long careers in the field, but they were trying to understand how people made decisions in the field. And they couldn't interrupt them while they were working, and so they started to use time-lapse photography, and I began carrying those cameras out, I think in 1963, and I'd film a crew working for a day, maybe 4 seconds between each frame, and then we'd talk to them and try to understand what happened. We weren't necessarily trying to motivate them. We were somewhere between trying to think about the system they were working in and their motivation and relationship with it. I was fascinated with that. I graduate from college. I go into the Navy. I'm an officer in the Civil Engineer Corps. I'm a member of MCB 11. We go to Vietnam at, I would say, just about the wrong time. When we land there, it was a quiet place. We were right on the DMZ, just south of the DMZ. And that turns into a real war over the next 9-10 months. And then we come back from there, and I am given the opportunity to be officer in charge of a SeaBee team. And this is an officer and 12 men. And they go off into strange places and they work for a year together. The training is quite rigorous. We try to cross-train so everybody knows a little bit about everybody else's capabilities. You become a pretty tight team in the course of that training. My team was fortunate to be sent to the far northern part of Thailand. We were up where Burma, Laos, and Thailand come together, and I was asked to build a road to a place called Hintak. You can find it in Wikipedia, Ban Hintak, Banhintaek, I guess, and which was unfortunate in the sense that it was right into the heart of the opium country, and so I got wrapped up in all kinds of politics about that while I was over there. The road itself was in very, I would say, tough mountains and heavy jungle. And so it took us a while to figure out how to do it. That we had maps that were made by the Japanese General Staff, but all the terrain was right, but all the villages had moved, and so that was made it difficult. Um, we uh, um, we built that road, and we came back. It was one of the great experiences of my life. I was the officer in charge of that. Nobody senior to me visited my camp in a year. I sent a note to my roommate in college, who was a graduate student in Florence, Italy, and he and I had built some stuff in college. And I said, "Why don't you hitchhike over and join us?" And he did. And so we were the only team in the world that had 14 guys, and I put him in greens and put him to work, and it was great to have an extra hand. And then we came back, and I served as an admiral's aide for 2 years. I worked for a while. I worked for the architect Paulo Soleri down in the desert of Arizona, where I grew up. And then I go back to graduate school trying to get a kind of, I'm still really fascinated with this problem about how people work. And I get involved there again, maybe a more sophisticated understanding of operations from that and systems design. And Geez, life rolls ahead for a while there. I hold jobs as civil engineers and one thing and another as a civil engineer doing that kind of work. And then I end up remarkably as a professor in the University of New Mexico. And I was brought there on a 1 year. I was there a visiting professor for for 1 year, and then another professor, fortunately for me, but unfortunately for him, passes away, and they're looking for somebody else, and so I get hired and I stay there for about 10 years. I receive tenure, but I don't have a PhD. And I began to realize that I was going to be on all the committees and all of that and not really doing what I wanted. So at the end of 10 years, I resigned from that and decided to put my full time into this, by that time, a well developed set of ideas around lean construction. And so we moved up here in the mountains, and I started getting on airplanes and traveling all over and doing both consulting and research. Glenn Ballard and I and Iris Tomlin and Todd Zabel started the Lean Construction Institute, and which was originally a kind of small consulting firm, and then we really became a research organization. And now it's a big deal. I'm absolutely not connected with it anymore. I wish them well and all that, but I'm not. I don't. I have no responsibility and no authority, and that sounds good to me. So, so
Sounds like a
that's where I am.
gotcha. Well, that's an amazing career, and it's interesting how things work out. So, there's this common thread through your life, all the way back to your mom as a production manager, to your time in college, in the military. Can you talk to us about how your experience in the military informed or
Sure.
influenced the development of lean
Well,
construction?
it's drawing those connections aren't exactly clear, but there's an interesting way that a set of ideas came in, and of course at the time they come in, there's no white light or red light that comes on that says pay attention to this, and so it's often in sort of retrospect that you realize how you've been shaped by your experience. So I arrive in Vietnam. I'm the most junior officer in the battalion, and I spent about 4 months as the responsible for the southern perimeter of the combat base. So I looked like a regular soldier, if you will, and led patrols and did the sorts of things you do when people shoot at you. And then I was given the job of being the Bravo Company commander. And the Navy was very stretched at that time, and so I was still an ensign, and that a company of that size calls for three officers that are senior to me, but there simply weren't enough people around. And so I became the Bravo Company commander, and we had a commanding officer that I can't say anything particularly nice about him. And he was eventually relieved, and we got a new man who was an electrical engineer. We wanted John Wayne. And we get this fellow who's a little bit overweight, wispy hair, and thick glasses. And he comes to my office early in his time there, and he comes in and sits down and says, "I'd like to hear what you have to say." And so I talked to him for a while, and he went away. And then he became was installed as the commanding officer. Perhaps a week passed, and I got this call to come to his office to plan a detachment. We often sent small groups of people off to drill wells someplace, or fix some electrical equipment, or all of the sorts of construction things that you might think of. And it was unusual to be called to the commanding officer's office, and perhaps dangerous. And so I went, and we all sat down around the table. I'm going to make it up, maybe 8 people. And Commander Hartel said, "Today we are here to plan a detachment to Cantien and to replace the well." It was something like that. And he said, "Look around the table. Do we have everybody here who needs to be here to plan that?" And of course we said yes. We later realized that he was actually sincere in that question, and sometimes we would go get other people. But then he did this thing which was quite surprising. He slid a small alabaster bowl. I actually have one. I'll show you. You can see it. It's about this size. It's almost identical to the one he has, and I've kept this as a kind of reminder. He slid it into the middle of the table, and he said, "Insignias." And we didn't quite know what he meant. And he takes off his insignia off his collar, and he puts it in the bowl. And everybody puts their rank in their insignia in the bowl. And what he was doing by that was setting aside the kind of command structure. He wanted to hear what people had to say. He wanted us to work on the problem in a collaborative way, we would say today, about that. And so we moved from a kind of hierarchical command and control structure into this roundtable discussion. And it was very interesting. Leland Peterson, who was probably the oldest man in the room, was an equipment operator. And at one point he says, "That's the stupidest idea I ever heard." And then he says, "Sir," sort of realizing that you don't normally speak to the commanding officer like that. And at the end of and we eventually got a plan for the work, and we pretty well knew what each of us was responsible for and what we were to do. And at this point, he slid the bowl back into the middle of the table, and said, he used the same joke every time from then on. He said, "Insignias, take your own. This is not an opportunity for promotion." And that was kind of a joke at the end of the meeting. And we would then go back into the structure of the command and control structure. And that really affected me. At first I thought I couldn't understand it, but eventually realized that when we would come to these meetings, we would have some tough problems and dangerous problems to deal with. And he expected us to give him our best. And so this kind of pudgy electrical engineer turns into sort of John Wayne. He is a tremendous leader, and that really had a big influence on me. And so the idea around lean construction, to hook back there, we kind of do that too. We have these traditional authority structures, and then we're also doing some very collaborative things where we're expecting people to learn how to work together in ways that they may not have worked together before. Our industry is so craft driven that it's not maybe often that electricians and pipe fitters and structural guys talk together about how they're going to solve a problem. And so that, I'm not saying that our planning system grew from those events, but maybe that I was more ready for them once we began to get into them. When I went to Thailand, so there I am in the mountains, and I had when I was in Vietnam, I had a couple of people on occasion follow an order I had given, doing what I said but not what I intended. They were sort of malicious compliance. They knew very well what I meant, but the words I used were such that they could find another way. And I'd had some of those, and so that plus Commander Hartel had made me perhaps not so confident in the traditional command and control structure. And so I decided I wouldn't give any orders while I was in Vietnam or in Thailand. and I gave 4, and I can remember 3, and I'll tell you one. Okay.
Okay.
The first one was we're building this camp up in the mountains. We're about 20 miles up into the mountains, and we're living back down in a village there where we have a kind of hotel, a kind of a place where we can sleep and get our breakfast and dinner served, and then they pack lunches for us to go up while we'd work in the mountains. And it was a muddy road, and we get stuck and all that. And the problem I had was we'd get back after a hard day's work, and we'd go into this restaurant, and they'd pop open the Singha beer, and people would sit down to have their dinner. And we had this pet monkey, and the pet monkey would run around the table, being cute and eating little bits of food and all that. Our wives or mothers would be disturbed at the sanitation, and and um and there would dogs would run around and bark at the monkey. And this was the time that I would be negotiating with people for work. There was one fellow, Omar the Elephant Man. I know that sounds strange, but he was the guy that had the elephant teams that would come out and skid big logs in for us to build bridges and that sort of thing. And so I'm trying to negotiate with this man whom I barely can understand through my interpreter, and this monkey is running up and down the table, and it's just more chaos than I can stand. And I didn't know quite how to deal with it, and so finally I realized I'd had enough. And so we're up at lunch one day up there in the mountains, and we're under this little lean-to, and I said to Chief Baker, I said, Chief, form them in on the parade ground at 1300. I'd never used military time. The idea of a parade ground was new. And he said, parade ground. And I swept my arm sort of, do I have to repeat myself, Chief? And I'm sure they thought that I'd lost my. And so at 1 o'clock, they're all standing in line out there, and I walk up as I should when I'm publishing an order, and the chief salutes me, and in a parade ground voice says that all the men of SeaBee Team 1112 are present, sir. And I said, thank you, Chief, and I'd like you to publish an order to the team and dismiss them. Here's the order: don't bring the monkey in the restaurant. And he leaned forward and said, sir, and I said, do I have to repeat myself? Yeah, don't bring the monkey in the restaurant. And it got and so there he gives a battalion size command, to troops that were in the next county. And so I remember 3 of them. I guess I'll tell you 2 of them, and one of them I can't remember. The second one was don't drive on the grass. And that sounds like an officer's order, but what I was concerned about was in the muddy season, if you drive in the road, it's muddy and you slide all over and it's unpleasant. But if you drive on the grass, you don't get stuck. But if you drive on the grass in the rainy season, then there will be no grass in the dry season, and you will be living in a dust bowl. And so and I'd learned that in Vietnam. And so and my guys, and me included, were much happier driving on the grass, but that made the road ever wider and wider and wider. And so saying don't drive on the grass, again, it sounds like an order an officer would give, but it had a positive intent about how we would manage our affairs. So those are some good stories that I think you can see, or maybe you can see a bit of the genesis of lean construction and the idea of inviting people that are not normal authorities or planning experts into the process of planning and organizing the work.
So you talk about shifting from, whether it's in construction or the military, or for that matter, any setting, you talk about shifting from a command and control context of giving orders to having people make promises.
Yeah.
So what happens psychologically to people? There has to be some reason that it's better for people to make promises than to receive orders. So in your experience, what happens inside of a person when they have the opportunity to make a promise or a commitment as opposed to getting an order that they have to carry out?
Well, I'll go on a slightly off tackle way here for that at first. It is people often, when you're in a planning meeting, you will often hear people they'll say, can you do this? And they will answer with answers like, I'm on it, or it's on the work plan, or they'll answer it in all kinds of ways that are not saying, as we might say in the Navy, aye, aye, sir, right? Where they actually accept the order and the consequences of getting it, and the problems of getting it done. And if you go to planning meetings, it's interesting to go in and sit in a planning meeting on a project and listen to the language. And I'm not talking about necessarily a lean project, but just a project, and hear the extent to which people actually make a promise as opposed to make something that sounds like it's near a promise. And this is a key kind of entrance to a key, I'll say, aspect of lean construction. And I learned this first from Hal Maycumber when he worked for Neenan Construction. And he asked me one time what I thought of Neenan Construction. I said they talk funny, and he said, no, they don't talk funny. They don't talk funny. And I was right and he was right. He was saying that he had taught them about it's called the language action perspective. We take action in our language, and I can give you I'll give you 5 examples. One action we take is we make an offer or a request. They're the flip side of the same coin. So I might say, Jack, can you do this by Thursday? And he might say, I'll try, or it's on the schedule, or whatever. But what I'm looking for is for him to, after I say that, we likely negotiate, and then he takes another action called making a promise. And he says, I'll do it. And a promise is a good promise when it's clearly understood the work and when it's due. And so he says, I'll have that to you by Thursday at noon. And then he goes to work, and he may make other requests and receive other promises from other people in the course of doing that work. And eventually he is done. And he is the person that declares complete. He says, I am complete with that electrical line. And that triggers, and that a declaration, like a declaration is positional, like only the Congress can declare war. And so a declaration is something that establishes a circumstance that's there in the field. So he says, I'm done. And at that point, maybe when he says I'm done, that triggers the inspection, or maybe there's something else that triggers the inspection. But knowing what that is really important. So far we have a request, offer, promise, declaration. There's 2 other actions we take in language. One is we make an assertion. We assert a fact. You and I are in a web-enabled Skype phone call today. That's a fact. That's an asserting a fact, right? I mean, it's obvious to us. We both believe that. I might make another one though, which is I offer an opinion. I make an assessment. And an assessment that might be appropriate here is, I'm pretty nervous about this. Giving this talk. That's what's going on for me. So assessments are really important, because the ability to make clear assessments and ground those in some basis, some fact, is very good. It's very powerful. I was walking out the driveway one day with my wife after I'd returned from a business trip, and it was a Friday evening, and it was lovely in the mountains, and we're walking up the driveway, and my wife says to me, the grass is getting long. How do you hear that?
I hear that as you need to cut the grass.
You might say a request with sanctions, maybe. That's maybe, I mean, you better cut the grass, right?
Right.
But did she actually make a request?
Negative,
right? And so I said, why did you say that? And she said, well, it's just an observation. And I don't want to offend the women in this call, but often people, and sometimes women, are indirect.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so it's just an observation, but there are many things you might observe, dear. The mountains are high, the sun is going down, the trees are green, the driveway is black, the dog is jumping. There's all those things that we might observe. And so why, of all those things that we might observe, did you observe that the grass is getting long? Of course, I think Well, so what do you think I'm thinking at this point? I'm thinking I'm going to get up in the morning and mow the grass, right?
Hmm.
And she says, well, I said it because I like the grass long.
Oh.
And so that O that you gave is just like me, right? But you can imagine if I hadn't in a way stuck on that action language, I would have taken her observation, whatever that is, her opinion really, the grass is getting long. It's not a request, and I'd have got up the next morning and mowed the grass, which would have built our relationship. And so the paying attention to the action we take in language is really crucial. And so one of the questions that we confronted in lean construction is a foreman's weekly work plan a promise?
Hmm.
Think about it. Think about a project as a network of commitments. That I'm making promises to you, and you're making promises to someone else, and we base those promises on our assessments of the circumstances and what our capabilities are, and we can make them, and we can carry them out, or we're not. We fail a lot of times carrying out promises. It's not. I don't think it's a moral failure to do that. But in doing the last planner, one of the things we found is that when we began talking to foremen about their weekly work plan, we began to think about their work plan as the plan I'm making for my crew is a promise I'm making to your crew.
Hmm.
And that changes the conversation in a planning meeting, right? And if you fail to make that promise, then we can legitimately say what went wrong, where you told me you were going to get that done last week and you didn't get it done. What went wrong? And you might say legitimately, well, I thought the rebar would be here on Tuesday, and it didn't make. And then you say, okay, well, what can we do next week to prevent that kind of problem from happening again? And so this is a kind of plan, do, check, act function, but it's really supported by our clarity of language. Having said that, I'm not very good at it. I mean, we still don't always pay attention to that, but I think it's a really important discipline for us to take. And stepping back away from that, the language action perspective, and there's some nice papers on that. There's some I can send some to you or something like that, and you can post them. But that became a kind of cornerstone in the lean construction world. And when we're measuring when we think of foreman planning as the foreman is making a promise, and when you speak to them in that term, we're asking you to make a promise here. We're not going to send you to hell if you break it, right? But we're asking you to do the best job you can making a promise, because if you do what you promise, then I can pick up the work when I expect to, and the project will be done more quickly, and it'll probably be done safer. And so that language thing is a really important part, and it's often lost in our normal speaking about lean. And if you think about it here, we're really trying to bring what is traditionally a command and control kind of function into a promising dialogue. And that's a really important shift in our thinking. Is the foreman's weekly work plan a promise to me, the superintendent, or is it a promise to the next crew in line?
Yeah, and that's a huge paradigm shift, and I want to make sure we talk about something you mentioned, and that's safety. There's an unexpected benefit to lean on project safety that I want to hit on. But let's talk about this paradigm shift, because what you're saying, the traditional approach, and most of the project meetings I've been in my 20-year career have been the schedule, the critical path schedule comes down from perhaps the scheduling guru in the office who may not know anything about the project, which is a problem in and of itself. Superintendent gets the schedule, they have their coordination meeting, and they say, you need to have, electrician, you need to have X number of guys, and you need to be doing this, and you got to be done by this date. And then 10 banger, you got to have this many guys doing this, plumber, etc. And they're prescribing the number of people, the method, the where they're going to be working. And in my experience, tell me you've seen this as well. In my experience, when you prescribe a method to somebody, especially if they're seems like the more hard driving they are, their response to somebody micromanaging them is to resist that plan
Yeah,
and to go find problems with it.
yeah, you can get that same sense of malicious compliance, right? They find a way to make it look like they were trying, or in a way, they act like they're complying but not really, and that's really a pernicious thing. If you think about the way you spoke about it, the schedule is in that process you told, nobody's actually giving anybody an order, right? They say the schedule says this. Everybody's talking in a kind of remoteness from the physical reality of things. And so it would be very interesting for a scheduler in one of those meetings to say, I'm here as a representative of the project manager, and I'm here to order you to place a concrete in box 106 by noon on Thursday. Well, the project would fall apart, right? I mean, you'd have a riot on your hands. But I think that no offense to the Project Management Institute and those that believe in that system, that identifying the sequence of work is not the same as gaining the commitment of the people to do the work. And we are in a very human business, and it's much more complicated than the CPM looks, the interaction with other parts. And so one of the things that happened to us is in a way, a big step in Last Planner was when Glenn Ballard one time said, I wonder how well planning works. And we took a while to figure out how to do this. And we said, well, let's go measure it. And we started going to the weekly work plan and having people tell us what they were going to do next week, and then coming back and saying, was the task done or not done? And the average that we got in those early work, and they were in all kinds of different projects, was about 54%. 54% of the tasks that people said they were going to get done actually do get done. Now, the consequence of that on a project is, first of all, it damages the relationships. That's one. It may actually make the subcontractor more money because they can go do stuff that they want to do that they get cashed for more quickly. All right. So that there's always a tension between the finances and the managing the workflow. But the idea that I'm making a promise to you becomes much more serious, and so we learned in that by measuring the planning system's performance that 54% of the tasks were being done. And what that happens on the project is you have a lot more inventory standing around. You have a lot more people standing around. You either have too many or too much or too few of almost anything when you have that kind of planning. And so the Last Planner system, we began to say, well, last week we couldn't do that because we didn't have the right tools. What are we doing this week to prevent that? And beginning to have a habit of plan, do, check, act. We didn't know about lean construction at the time. We didn't know about lean. We were just sort of following our nose, and then we kind of back into it in some almost crazy ways or lucky ways that we do that. And so thinking about planning as promising is I think a big shift, and it's difficult for people to do, partly because of the traditions of command and control. I think learning to swing between a command and control situation and a distributed management situation reminds me of working for Captain Hartel. All right, back and forth. And we don't have to be just one kind of person on the project. We have to have the courage to speak our opinion. We have to have the courage to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. We have to say, I'm sorry, I don't have the tools. Whatever we have to say, and it may mean that we have to take responsibility for some errors we've made. But I'm going to making this sound like a personal growth effort, but it's really a way to make the projects run more smoothly.
So to get really tactical and practical, what I'm hearing you say is that, let's say the person that's listening, they've got either their team of employees or they've got a group of subcontractors, and at their next meeting, the approach I'm hearing is that they should walk in and say, okay, here's the milestone schedule, which needs to be established. And that's probably one of the best uses for a CPM schedule is to develop
Right,
the milestone
right. I
schedule.
agree with that.
And then say, all right, here's where we have to be. What do you need in order to get there? And then instead of prescribing what people need to do on the team, to ask them, what do you need in order to do that? And identify the constraints that are holding them back, and then figure out ways to solve those constraints for them, and then get their commitment. So to go
Right.
back to what you said, it's to make an offer or a request, and then negotiate. Okay, what's it going to take for you to do that, and then get them to make a commitment, and stay with it until they make the commitment. My experience has been there's a temptation to walk into a meeting. Okay, we got to have this. Can you do it? And then they'll say something like you said.
I'll
Well,
try.
I'll try.
Right, exactly.
I'll try.
Right.
Yeah, we'll do our best. If this guy does his job, then we'll do it. And the temptation is to just move on and hope for the best. My experience has been you really need to sit on it and say, all right, what's it going to take? What's holding you up? And get them to make a commitment. Because what I found is when those people will make a commitment, then they'll own it, and then they'll drive it.
Well,
they'll make sure it happens.
Yeah, and be willing at that moment to accept a no. Look, Jack, I cannot commit to that. We don't know where the pipe is. We don't know if it's coming by Thursday or not. And so I don't want to tell you I'm going to do it and then have Jack be ready the next week to go in there and do the work, because I don't think it's going to be ready, because I don't know where that pipe is.
Right. That's a good point.
And so but now you are really shifting, in that conversation, you're kind of shifting the roles of authority in that, right? I mean, you're letting people you're actually letting them have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of letting that have that conversation is, if you go, can we shift just a second? And there are two books that I'd recommend. One of them is called, and you can get this on the web, it's called Power to the Edge, Command and Control in the Information Age. And Power to the Edge is a book written in the Naval Postgraduate School by some very bright and powerful guys who are thinking about the consequences of computer connections. Imagine we are all connected, wired into the project's grid here. But think about the problems of what happens what the military wants is to have it so that the decision making, the kind of fine-grained decision making, is made close to the edge of battle, where the people on the ground have the best understanding of the circumstance. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine that there are some colonels and generals that don't like that to happen, or are uneasy with that. But the advent of the computers and the iPads walking around projects and all that really is shifting the way we can coordinate. And so that's an important book. Another book that you should read is by Stanley McChrystal, who was a general in charge in Iraq, and it's called Team of Teams. And in that, Stanley goes there, and it's clear to Stanley very quickly that we're losing the war, and we're losing a war to people that are ill-trained, weakly armed, and sort of erratic, but they're beating us. And so Stanley tries a bunch of things, and then he decides to shift and move the conversation to have the conversations among the people that are closer to the edge of battle. And he says, we got this big warehouse, and we had lots of whiteboards on rollers that people would cluster around and plan together how they were going to carry that out operation. They become much more successful. Their casualty rate drops, and there's a whole bunch of fine things that happen there. And you can imagine that there's generals and colonels and on down who find that a very difficult kind of thing to be letting people, in a way, taking away the decisions that they used to make in their central authority and giving that out to where near the edge. Power to the Edge is the name of that of the Navy's book. Miss Crystal's book is Team of Teams. That's what he wanted. He wanted a team of teams. And then there's another book by another Navy officer called Turn This Ship Around. And he takes over a demoralized nuclear submarine, and he basically doesn't give orders. He asks questions. and there's only one order on the ship that he reserves for himself. There's only one thing that he reserves for himself clearly, and that is the responsibility of launching a nuclear weapon. And which is a somber responsibility, but he does not want to delegate that to anybody, because it is the whole reason for him being out there, and it's his job to know when to do that.
Yeah, Team. I've started reading Power to the Edge based on your recommendation. I read Team of Teams, great book. I actually interviewed the one of his co-authors, Chris Fussell, who was his aide de camp for a while, and that's episode 32 of this podcast. If anybody's interested, that was a really fascinating conversation, and I like some of the tactical things that General McChrystal did in that big warehouse you were talking about. He said he took most of his phone calls on speakerphone. And then one of the most effective things they did was they had a video conference where everybody across in the war on terror across different continents was on a video conference for an hour to 2 hours, etc., so that everybody knew. They had what they called shared consciousness.
Right.
And I am convinced that's the key to revolutionizing the way construction projects go together. And I've seen it in my own experience as well. Let's talk about, I want to go back to one thing before we talk about safety. In my experience, going back to your conversation with your wife, she made an observation, made a statement, and then, well, I'll put it put it in my shoes. When my wife makes an observation like that, then I speculate about what's behind that and what's the directive, and then what does she mean and all this sort of thing. So I found when there's any sort of conflict, well, I found in general that people are very poor when it comes to conflict resolution and being direct. There's this fear of being direct. How important is it? How important is being able to resolve conflict to leadership, and maybe more specifically to managing projects?
Yeah, I think it is a maybe that's what leadership is about. Because you always have contending demands. There's somebody that has to make trade-offs, and if you're making trade-offs, you may not be making them at the best level, and all that. And so I think it's the one dodge is to say this is a really tough problem, and I think we have to learn how to do that. And the people that have to learn the most are the commanding officers, and those guys that are like the schedulers that think they have some authority, or that there's some relation, they can actually make things happen by putting it on a schedule. Those people will undergo a change, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think it's certainly more pleasant to work in that team of teams position, unless I guess you're Napoleon. So does that help? Maybe not.
No, it does help. It does help, and it's a paradigm shift. It's really easy to stay in your office and close your door and issue orders and hope for the best, but it just doesn't work in my experience. You definitely get better results out of your people. You'll have less turnover. You'll have better project results. Make more money by getting out of your office, engaging your team. And one paradigm shift that I've seen, I've worked with some people who see their employees and their subcontractors as a source of problems that need to be dealt with, and then there are other people who see their people, their team, as a source of solutions and creativity. And one is very different. One approach informs or affects the way people treat their people very differently than the other. So let's talk about safety. You talked about there's an impact or a positive influence on project safety from lean. Can you talk about that a little bit and what you've seen?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some statistics that I was recently given by Hal Maycumber. Hal is incidentally the guy he's back in Boston, and he's the one that brought that language action perspective into the lean world. And I have to say, me and a bunch of other people resisted it for a long time. But Hal has been working with, I may not be exactly right, but I'm going to say 7 or 8 of the larger construction companies, or I'm not even sure that's true. I'll just say significant construction companies in the Boston area. And there's some rate that is named in OSHA about what your accident and incident rate is, or I can't tell you the name of that measure, but these in the tradition right now the industry is at a 0.25 of that measure, and these 8 companies or 7 companies that Hal's been around, their number is 0.125. It's half of the accidents and injuries that are suffered on traditionally managed projects. And what's interesting, I mean, that's a lot of lives. We kill 900 people in the construction industry every year, and that's a lot of lives and a lot of limbs and fingers and all that saved. And in a way, we really don't know why that's happening. We can conjecture about that. And one of the things I would like to do is, I'm trying to do it with Glenn Ballard out at Project Production System Laboratory. It's a relationship at the University of California. It's a research organization, and we're trying to answer that same question. We see it's working better, but we don't know why. If we knew why, we might be able to amplify that. We might be able to take greater advantage of it. We might be able to do something different. And so we're trying to understand that, and that's where we are right now. I wish I could say more about it, but the statistics are supporting our view, and that's where we are. I suspect that it's that we are going to find something that is, I've been meaning to bring up somewhere else in our conversation here, and is about safety. And that is that we are so used to working in our silos and our command and control structures that we don't really know how to collaborate very well. And learning how to do that, and learning how to swing back and forth like General McChrystal's people do, to collaborate and then swing back into a structured effort to go forward, is a talent that you don't get by just saying it. And I think that's an area where we're going to have we'll have a lot of work, and it will have a big impact on safety. My guess is the reason that we're safer is because in the course of conversations, we're bringing greater stability to the projects, and so there are fewer things to trip over. You don't have as much inventory on site because you don't need it, and that sort of thing. And that's nice, but it kind of goes in the face of our contracting. It's difficult for people to join that if they're in lump sum contracting. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing some shift to collaborative contracts, because they free up. In traditional practice with your subcontractors, every subcontractor is trying to optimize their performance. And they're saying, optimize my performance, not the project. And so you have subs that we're trying to race out in front. You have subs that are trying to always take advantage of their thing, because if they can get that in fast, they can get the cash flow going from it. And when you're in the other kind of organization, where you are actually in a collaborative organization, when your goal is to optimize the project and not the piece, then you can move money across boundaries. And one of the things we learned, Owen Matthews in Florida taught us this, is that if you can move, it's difficult to innovate on a project if you cannot move money across a boundary. It's very easy to innovate if you can move money across a boundary. But our current contracting system tends to drive us into believing that we have to have lump sum contracts for each sub. So each sub is going to try and optimize their performance, and the project will be wonderful. Imagine a basketball team or a football team where each player decided they were going to optimize their performance and screw the rest of those guys. And so this I think it's an unconscious error in this lump sum contracting. It sounds like a good idea at the time, but if you examine it more deeply, and I'll say from our lean perspective, you see that it's really getting in the way of innovation. Once you can move stuff across boundaries, you can do modules, and you can assemble stuff offsite, and you can do all kinds of things. I'm not saying you can't do that otherwise, but the accounting for it's a heck of a lot more difficult when you have lump sum contracting.
Yeah, and so contracts are good for assigning risk, not necessarily good for the flow of a project.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way you assign, and if you have these collaborative contracts, it may in fact reduce the risk. Right.
Right.
And so that's there are many people that they like all kinds of things about lean construction, but that's a real choking point. That's something that's difficult for them to swallow, and I think just time and success will win that argument, and we'll see who's strongest.
So in 20 years, maybe it's further. Let's say 50 years out, when people look back at how we're doing construction right now, what will they shake their head at and say, I can't believe they used to do it that way as far as contracts?
Yeah, I'm sort of reminded of those Charlie Chaplin movies. I mean, I think we're making some pretty wild movies out there right now, and I think you're going to see greater stability. Projects will be quieter. They will be built for greater flexibility, so we can maybe change the use of these things. We'll see that sort of thing coming, and I. I guess I feel I'm lucky to have been in the places I have and had these experiences to see this happening. It's just, for me, it's just a really exciting thing to see it go. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate, and a lot of other people in the industry appreciate the time and effort and research you put into coming up with these, not only doing the research, but to come up with practical actions that we can take. And speaking of that, let's talk to the project managers out there. What is the job of the project manager? What should they really be doing out on their projects?
You asking me to answer that question or them?
Yeah. What do you? There's seems to be a misconception if the job of the project manager is not to prescribe or not to give orders. What should they be? How do they need to think differently about their job as the project manager sitting in the trailer, dealing with maybe they've got a group of direct forces and they've got their subcontractors. What should they really be focused on? If they had to do if you did the 80-20 analysis on the things that make a project manager successful, what would be in the 20% that give them the 80% benefit?
Well, some of these things are maybe well out of their control, like the ability to move money across boundaries, the contractual forms and things like that. They might go down to the home office and try and make those changes, and that's more difficult to get. But when we think of a project manager, I guess I'll probably slide back to some military metaphor here. He is the commander of that ship, and he is the person that, or she is the person that is going to set that course. He or she is going to set the standards of behavior and the standards of honesty and the standards of integrity on the project, and being tough and silent isn't the key. I would say maybe project managers might carry a little counter around in their pocket, one in their right and one in their left pocket, and on the right side click it every time you ask a question. On the left side, click it every time you just give a command, and see what the balance of that is, and really try to change that. I understand the difficulty of making that shift. I can point back to Commander Hartel about it. It's not easy, because you have a sense that if you let loose of the reins, the thing is going to become chaos. And so I think the project manager, if they want to make this shift, their role is to make an assessment of the capabilities of their team, to look at where they can develop them so that they can begin to move the project into that direction, and to run small experiments. What if we tried this? What if we tried that? And then come back and examine them at the end of the week. Examine a weekly work plan as an experiment, and begin to get people interested in the actual management of the work instead of the pounding on tables and all that.
So you mentioned it's better for people to ask questions. What are a couple of good questions that project managers should be asking their subs and their team? Should it be, do you have everything you need? What information do you need? Who's holding you up?
Those are pretty good. It might be at this point, you're really, go back to that language action, you're really asking for their opinions, right? You're trying to get out their real opinions about things. And so you might ask them a question about, I try to lead with something like, you guys have been doing great. Your planning reliability is up, and that's great. But what's the one thing that we could do right now that would improve this project?
Hmm.
Or is there anybody that you would like to talk to that you can't talk to? That sort of thing, to find out about if there's people that aren't able, because of commercial structures or whatever, to discuss issues. I'm thinking of team of teams here. That would be something that McChrystal would go for sure. Um, um, you know, we ended up inventing that kind of collaborative planning somewhere between Last Planner and, we call it pull planning, where people get together and they plan the work together, and they use sticky notes on the wall, and they move them around, and they make agreements, and they maybe change the batch size and do all that sort of stuff. And one of the things I learned in doing a lot of those is you never know what you have in the room. And one is a case where we were trying to put an MRI in a hospital, and the hospital needed it up and running by the end of December, so it could be on the books for their taxes this year. And we did this kind of pull planning, and we could not get it done. We could not get it done. We could not get it. We couldn't figure out a way. We're like, I'm going to make this up. We're in August, and we just can't make that. We just can't see how we're going to make that year end thing. And finally, when we're right at the point of almost I guess not despair, but we've sort of said, well, we just can't do it. And the hospital was not pleased with that answer. At that point, the woman who was the project manager for the actual installation of the MRI, not all the stuff that got there, but the actual installation of the equipment, she said something like, guys, if you can give us that space with the wiring prepared by December 19th, we'll have it up by the end of the year. And we were surprised she said that. And I remember somebody saying, well, what about the children? And she said, they'll get very nice bicycles, right? We are willing to spend a lot of money to get this on our books by the end of the year. I didn't want to say that before, because I didn't want to have to spend all that money to get it on our books at the end of the year. But that's something that we need to do. And so I'm telling you, if you guys can get it done by that date, we will complete the work by December 31st. And so when you're in those planning meetings, you really don't know what everybody else knows. You don't know what's in the room. You don't know what capabilities in the room. You don't know who might have excess capacity somewhere else. You just don't. You enter in a sense of it might be about to go back to Commander Hartel, and that is take off your insignias and ask some questions.
Yeah, the other thing that I've found is you don't know what assumptions people are making.
Exactly.
Or what they're speculating about something. And the only way to get to the bottom of those assumptions is to ask questions. And there's been so many times that people would say, oh, I thought you needed this, or I didn't think we were allowed to do that. And the best way to flesh those out is to ask questions. It's like the way I think of it is, it's sort of like if you are a running back in football and you're facing you got the offensive line in front of you and you got the defensive line in front of you. And if you look at it in general, it's just a wall. But if you just keep looking, you can find a seam. You may have to turn sideways, you may have to jog back and forth, but if you keep pushing and asking questions, you'll find the seam and you'll find the opening that you can get through. But so many times it's just, oh, well, we can't do it. We just punt. Or people make the commitments that they can't back up and say, well, we'll try. And, well, it just didn't happen. And nobody wants to hear a bad yes. They'd rather hear a no rather than a yes that they can't back up.
And I maybe this is, I don't want to give this up, but in some cases it might be that you say something to me you want me to do, and it's something that I actually can't tell you yes or no about. And so I might say to you, well, I'll try. And then maybe the answer to an I'll try is, what do you need to be successful? How can I help you? If this is dicey, how can we remove the dice, right? How can we, how can we do it at that point? Because telling telling them to go to hell, you can tell them to go to hell, but they just won't go. They just won't go.
And that's a paradigm shift as well. It's asking, all right, what do you need? What can I do to help you? Instead of, damn it, you've got to do this, and it's on the schedule, and we're going to back charge you if you don't. It's okay. What do you need? Talk to me. What can we do to help? And that's not something that I've heard a lot from superintendents. I don't hear them saying, what can we do to help you? That feels touchy-feely. But in reality, in my experience, it's been much more successful.
Yeah, I think they have this safety initiative. They're starting out at University of California, and I'd like to give a plug for a book. It was written in 1985 by a man named Charles Perrow, Perrow, and it's called Normal Accidents. And what he proposes is that accidents arise because of what's going on within the systems, and in some cases you'll normally have accidents. And he gives great examples of that, scare you to death. And we've recently gotten in touch with him. I read the book in '85 and forgot it for the 25 years or 30 years, but it's a very interesting book, and it challenges our thinking about safety in that regard. And he's one of the lines that I'm going to try and follow. He was kind enough to reply to my email, and he says he has some people that are doing research on construction at the University of California, Davis, and so maybe we've got something going on there. But that's the hot button for me is to get into that topic.
Yeah. You mentioned that we as an industry kill 900 people a year. So if there's something we can throw our energy behind to save lives, save limbs, eyes, fingers, etc., then that's definitely something worth spending some time on.
And you've used the term paradigm several times, and I think that that's what's going to happen, but I can't see that yet, and so it's more an act of faith than it is anything else at this point. But it seems to me that we got where we are today in lean construction by challenging the traditional thinking in ways that were surprising and literally have changed the paradigm of management here. We didn't set out to do that. We're just lucky people. I mean, we're not stupid, but luck really mattered here. And we met the right people at the right time, and maybe that's what we've done again. And so I don't know that there is another improvement of safety, but it makes me uneasy to think that the problem is the training and motivation of the worker. Everything else about the project we turned to management about, but safety looks like it's all their fault, and that just doesn't seem right to me. So yeah.
Yeah. So the paradigm shifts. What are a couple of the key paradigms that were turned on their head as part of the lean construction process?
I think the first one was articulated by Lauri Koskela from Finland, and I remember falling out of my chair when I read this. He said that projects, there were three primary, functions or activities. He said that there is value, activities, and flow. And I was very familiar with value and activities, but the idea of flow completely knocked me off my pins. And what he was talking about was not the way in which one crew was more productive or not, but rather about the flow of information and materials and tools between and tasks between crews. How do we manage that workflow? And that led us into Goldrat's book, The Goal. And we invented this book game called The Parade of Trades, which shows the compounding effect of dependence and variation on system performance. And so that whole idea of focus on flow is really a kind of launch pad for all kinds of things. And you don't see that I can recall any emphasis on flow in the at least the older form of project management. I haven't been around the Project Management Institute for a few years. So
let's talk about flow a little bit. I agree. I ran a construction company for about 3 years, and it was a lot like a military operation. We had a very mobile workforce doing sewer line maintenance and repair work all over the place. And shared resources, shared equipment, constant changes, and it was all about the flow of information, and developed a few tools on that. So can you talk about, do you have any examples of what flow should look like, what good flow on a project feels like?
Well, I think if you walked on a project, maybe an indication of the quality of the flow, I'm not quite sure what I mean by that, is the amount of inventory standing idle. You know, if you go, often I can remember there was a project at University of Colorado in Boulder when we were living over there, and it was in a fairly congested site, and it was there. You couldn't drop a nail in that. I mean, it was absolutely packed. They had all this stuff crammed into this little site. Well, if is it, of course, there's some crazy things about payment. Sometimes you don't get paid unless it's on site. That's not helping. And so maybe all that stuff was on site, so they got some partial credit for getting it, getting paid by their contract. But 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 I would say that where you see flow more clearly is there won't be a lot of stuff. There won't be a lot of stuff on site, because the stuff that's needed will be what we need today was brought yesterday, and I put it in place, and there's a space for the next day tomorrow. There's a steady kind of cadence. I think it's probably why they teach you to march in the military, right? You need a kind of cadence, and you have to be able to uh, uh, look at that stack of stuff. When I was a project manager years ago, after I got out of the Navy, I was pleased to have lots of stuff around me, because it gave me security that no matter what happened, I could do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand that. It's a nice urge, but if you really wanted the project to sing, there'd be a truck that came in at 1:35 in the afternoon and left at 1:38, and it dropped off its stuff and went away. And I think we're gonna see that. I think we're gonna see increased modularity and decreased inventory on site.
Interesting. What other paradigm shifts do you think are key to moving the construction industry forward other than flow? The change from command and control and issuing orders to getting people to make promises. That sounds like a paradigm shift.
And to genuinely think for themselves, right? I mean, I don't remember who said it. If you're going to be dumb, you got to be tough, so, and so I think that we are, the workforce of today is often highly educated, much more serious people than you might think when you first meet them, and I think we're not taking advantage of them. I think we're not taking advantage of them, and we're not helping them grow. And that's an area that we treat them as almost like a disposable tool, as opposed to something that's more valuable. Maybe I'm being romantic about that, but I don't think so.
No, I agree. I think it goes back to looking at people as something that some resource that has to be kept busy. It's a source of problems. It breaks down. It has baby mama problems at home and doesn't want to come into work and that sort of thing. But the reality is it's a source of creativity, a creative source of ideas, a source of solutions, and it's a huge resource that's untapped in most construction industries or most construction businesses, has been my experience.
Yeah,
any other big paradigm shifts that people need to think differently about?
I'll say I'm most interested in right now is to really begin to rethink safety. I think this idea that it's the workers, that it's the motivation and training of the workers that's a problem. I can't deny that there are people that have bad luck, or there are people that are stupid and difficult. But I think that we really need to rethink this issue about safety, and try to, if you think about it, let's go back to General McChrystal or Power to the Edge. They do really dangerous stuff, and so safety for them is a very practical and real concern. And they really, you don't send people out with the opportunity to get killed lightly, and so they're really focused on safety, and I doubt that they blame the soldiers for the problem.
Yeah, I think I wasn't in the military, but I'm extremely grateful for folks like yourself who were. And one thing I've heard consistently through interviews and books is that there's a common misconception that people are out there fighting for their country. And what the common theme that I've heard is that I'm fighting for my buddy,
The guy on the left, right? Exactly right.
Yeah, I'm taking care of the guy on the left. That's who I'm fighting for. And their approach is, their goal is it's not just I go home safe, it's we all go home safe. And I feel like when I've seen safe projects, that's been the approach of everybody on the site. Is it's not, well, I need to get home safe, and watch out for my interests. The focus is we all go home safe,
Yeah.
and we're all safe.
And that reminds me of another experience I had, and it's a short war story. One night, when I was on the security platoon out there at the edge of the combat base, things got very heated, and there were lots of people were shooting at lots of people, and I stood up because I couldn't see what was going on. It was fairly dark, and I was scared to death, but I, it was my job to kind of see what was happening, right, and to try and figure it out. And I want you to know there was no sense of heroism about that. I mean, I was scared shitless. But I kind of struggled up, and while I'm standing up, I'm suddenly blown off of my feet. And there's a guy on top of me, and I think that I'm being attacked by one of the other guys, one of the other side. And I roll around, and I finally realize it's Petty Officer Stewart, who is one of my guys. And I said, Stewart, what are you doing? And he said, get down, sir. You're the only officer we have. And that really stuck with me, because, and by that, I think that we have to, when we assume the mantle of authority, we become that position, and people have a huge amount of respect for you, or they don't, depending on how you behave, and they are going to be looking out for you too. Mm-hmm. And that's, I almost cry when I tell that story, because I was literally blown away, by it, and it was one of the big. I'm going to guess that every officer in a war eventually has an experience like that, where they suddenly realize, no shit, this is my fault, right? I've got to deal with this. Mm-hmm. And that was mine, and I'll never forget that moment. And I think that we have people in our companies today that are willing to, in a sense, say that and recognize the authority, if we just let that kind of conversation happen. Maybe that's a place to end this. I don't know.
I completely agree with that statement, and I think that's another paradigm shift.
Yep.
That we as leaders need to understand that, well, we all want to be led. We want to be led by good people. We want to follow good people, and everybody does. If we're in the middle of an organization, we want the executives or the ownership to be good leaders, and the people that we support and lead want to follow good leaders. And it's not a matter of going out and forcing people to do things or try to motivate them. The reality is they want to be led. They want to be led. And I think that's a great place to land this thing. So, Greg, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. If people want to find out more about you or get in touch with you, is there a way for them to contact you, or find out, maybe learn if there are articles or other ways to get more of this kind of information from you?
Yeah, I don't mind giving out my email. My wife just said, she's not here, but she said, don't do that. But I'm trying to be retired. My brain is declining. There's no question about that. And I've got some stuff I want to write for my grandchildren and all that. But I'm pretty seduced by by what's going on, And so give me a call, give me a email, ask a question, and be glad to help.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, folks, if you want to get in touch with Greg, email me. I'm not going to post his email address out there in case some spam bot gets a hold of it. Send me an email. I get plenty of spam already, so it's not going to be a problem. Just send me an email, todd@constructionleadingedge.com, and I'll put you in touch with Greg. So, Greg, thanks again so much. Appreciate everything you've done for the industry and you're continuing to do for the industry, and for taking some time to share with us today.
Super. Well, I enjoyed it. Nothing better than telling old war stories. So there you have it. Thanks.
There you go. Hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I really appreciate the generosity of Greg spending his time sharing his decades of wisdom. Be sure to connect with him wherever you can. Take his advice. Put this stuff to work. One of the best things you can do for someone who is mentoring you or sharing their wisdom is actually use the stuff they tell you. So put this stuff to work. Don't forget, if you want to learn how to systematize your business, to eliminate chaos, set your business up so it runs like a well-oiled machine, because eventually, if you want to sell your business, you have to have systems in place, right? You can't sell your business and then step out of it if everything revolves around you. So learn how to systematize your construction business. Go to constructionbusinessaccelerator.com. Grab your free videos. Systematize your construction business. Don't forget about Company Cam. With Company Cam, there's no more second guessing what's getting done or pestering your crews to send you pictures. Every photo your guys take at a job is automatically organized by location, instantly synced from the field to wherever you are. Now you'll know exactly what's happening across your company. Claim your free 14-day trial, plus get 50% off your first 2 months at companycam.com/CLE, and join myself plus a group of other like-minded construction business owners in sunny Florida, April 2nd and 3rd, and learn how to maximize your bottom line. Come to The Advance, the bottom line growth hacks and secrets for builders and contractors. April 2nd and 3rd, Fort Myers, Florida, 85 degrees, no chance of snow. You're going to learn how to maximize your bottom line. Go to constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/advance. Grab your early bird seats if they're still available. And if you're driving or working out and you can't get to a website, then send me a text. Let me know what you're looking for, and I'll send you a link. Text me at 859-667-2015. Let me know how I can help you. And you know what? If you're a construction business owner and you want to get on the phone and talk about some of the things you're dealing with, and you need some help, you need to talk through some of the issues, you need to get to the root cause, then let's set up a free strategy session. Let's talk about it. Go to constructionleadingedge.com/call. And if you're a construction business owner, then I want to help you out however I can. I'll help you walk through, deal with what you're dealing with. Sometimes it's helpful just to get stuff out of your head with an objective third party who knows what you're dealing with. So schedule your free strategy call. If you're a construction business owner, constructionleadingedge.com/call. And as always, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate the ratings, the reviews. If you could take a minute and leave a rating and a review on the podcast player of your choice, that helps get the word out there to the rest of the interwebs. And if you could share this podcast with somebody you think would get some value out of it, I would appreciate that as well. Thanks for listening. My name is Todd DeWalt from constructionleadingedge.com. I'll see you next time.